Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to 2022. I am Tracy Stuckrath, and welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast live. We are here to talk about all things food and beverage with experts on sustainability and safety and veganism. And we want to make sure that we're teaching you, our listeners, how to create inclusive experiences that are also safe and sustainable for your company, the world, the planet, and all of our people. So to kick off 2022, I'm so excited it's also Veganuary and Dry January. So a lot of my episodes this month are going to be focused on veganism as well as drinking zero proof cocktails and mocktails. So we're going to kick it off today talking about veganism, and I am so excited to have Chantal Cooke with us today. She is an award-winning journalist turned PR guru. She's the founder of Passion for the Planet Radio and a boutique PR agency, Panpathic. And she has also been a vegan for many, many years. So welcome to the show, Chantal.
Hi, lovely to be here.
That was a little bit of a tongue twister. Welcome to the show, Chantal.
I know. But you did it.
I did it. Yes. So I'm so excited about this. And, we chatted months ago about what this is and why you do it. And tell the audience, how long have you been vegan? And actually just before the show, a lot of your clients are focused on food and beverage as well as sustainability and climate and all of that. So talk about what made you go vegan and how long you've been vegan.
Okay. So I first went vegetarian, and that was in my 20s. So that was quite a long time ago. And really it was all about animal welfare and the fact that it just doesn't seem right that there are other sentient beings that we share the planet with, and we should go around, killing them is one thing, because I know that, certain mammals obviously do eat meat, and that's part, whether you're an omnivore or a carnivore, that's kind of how the natural cycle works. But it's the way we do it, and it's the level at which we do it, and it's the way in which the animals are treated during that process that I just do not find ethically acceptable. It's not the actual act of eating meat, as I say, because, that's not necessarily an unnatural thing to do, but it's the way we do it, and it's the quantity that we eat as well. So if you think from an evolutionary perspective, we'd have eaten tiny quantities of meat, because meat would have been a very difficult thing to have got. It would have been high energy for us to expend, time, and difficult to get. So I think it's all those things that really kind of pushed me into being vegetarian, first of all. And I was vegetarian for a good 20, 25 years. And then it sort of slowly began to dawn on me that being vegetarian wasn't really enough. Because if you think about, I used to argue, oh no, you can eat eggs because the chickens no chicken dies. And you can drink milk because no cow dies. Actually, that's wrong. Lots and lots of cows die in order that I can drink milk, because of course a cow has to get pregnant, and a cow will have to get pregnant every single year in order to give a complete supply of milk. And of course, what happens to the calves? Well, they don't want the calves drinking the milk, because that milk's for us. So the calves actually get slaughtered. And because milk cows are not the same as beef cows, those cows are not then raised for beef. So it's not like it's a byproduct. It's okay, we're having lots of baby cows and they'll head off for beef and they'll live a bit of a life and then that's not how that works. And if slightly sidetracking, but I think it is interesting. I found out recently from my physiotherapist, actually, her husband is a dairy farmer, and the issue with these kind of disposable calves was such a big issue in the industry that they actually have a campaign currently in the UK called Every Calf Counts. And that when you buy the female calves off the farmer, the dairy farmer, you now have to take the male calves as well. In the past, the male calves, nobody wanted them, so they were literally just slaughtered and thrown away. Whereas now, as part of this, and only certain dairies, sign up to this, but it was such an issue that there's a campaign to make it to sort of do this every calf count things, which just gives to show how bad the situation is. Anyway, having kind of realised that actually cows die and chickens die because, hey, what happens to all the baby chicks that are male and don't produce eggs? That's the bit that kind of pushed me over the edge and went, you know what, I can't say that I love animals and that I'm behaving ethically if I continue to behave as a vegetarian rather than a vegan. So that's a rather long answer to a short question.
No, and that's really, you just taught me something new. We don't even think about that, right? That aspect of milk production and egg production. And so let's maybe table that and come back to that, because I think that's kind of interesting for people to understand that whole process, right? And what happens to them. So, I'm going to ask this question. So if they're taking both of them, then what are they doing with the male calves then?
So the male calves do get fattened up for a short period, let's say about sort of 6 months or so, and then they are sold for meat because they're a little bit bigger, but they tend now to go into pet food and things like that because we've bred our cows to not produce good meat, but to produce great milk because you want all the energy to go into the milk production. Or we've bred them in another way to produce really good meat. So they muscle up and bulk up a lot. So you get a good amount of meat off the cow, but they don't really produce a lot of milk, sort of thing. And actually the same applies to leather. There's a different set of cows that produce leather as well. Okay. So, and that's all to do with human breeding. That's not to do with, nature producing different cows. That's just the way we've bred them. And therefore trying to sort of convince myself that, these things are byproducts, isn't actually the case. I said there is this slight move, and I can only speak for the UK on this one, towards this every calf counts, but it's still a very, very short life for the male cows. Right. They don't get much of a life.
Okay, so I'm going to definitely look into that because that sounds very interesting campaign. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so why, besides what we just talked about, why is moving to plant-based eating so important?
So actually, there are lots of reasons. So even if the kind of the animal welfare side or the, sort of using animals in that way isn't something that really bothers you that much, then another reason is there's lots and lots of evidence to show that generally eating a vegan or at least a vegetarian diet is much healthier than a meat-based diet. Now, I have to caveat that because obviously as a vegan or a vegetarian, I can eat unhealthily just as much as you can as a meat eater, for example. If I choose to eat lots of cake and lots of chips and, and all that kind of stuff, that might be vegetarian or vegan, but it's still not going to be very healthy. But generally speaking, if you're comparing a healthy meat diet with a healthy vegan diet or vegetarian diet, you will always be healthier and better off going plant-based than you would do eating meat, because generally meat isn't that great for us. Now, obviously, there are grades of meat and the way in which it's cooked and all those kind of things make a difference. But generally speaking, we know eating vegetables is much healthier for us and eating pulses and things than eating meat. So there's health. Then another reason, and I think this is a big one, in particular for younger generations I speak to now who are saying this is one of the reasons that's made them go vegan or vegetarian, is to do with the impact on the climate. So we know that if we actually got rid of all meat production, let's just say tomorrow, now let's not talk about the ethics of all the animals and all the rest of it, but let's just say, imagine we got rid of all the meat production, we would free up so much land. It's something like the land equivalent of China, the USA and Europe combined. I mean, it's a phenomenon. I know, it's almost mind-blowing. Now, you'd have to add in a bit more in order to then grow the irrelevant pulses and other vegetables and things to feed us to replace that meat. But you would never use up the same quantity of land that you're using for the meat production. And it's because meat production is such an it's not very effective. It's not very productive, if you like. So you use a huge amount of land for one cow. That cow drinks a huge amount of water. The vast majority of, say, soya products, so if we think about Amazon rainforest being chopped down in order to grow soya, so a lot of people say, oh, but you're a vegan, you eat lots of soya. yeah, I do eat soya, that's true, but a minuscule amount in comparison to the amount that a cow would eat, for example.
Okay.
So, in fact, around about 90% of the world's soya production goes to feed livestock, which then gets converted into human food. But that's, and then you think for everybody who eats soya at the moment, including obviously people in Asian countries who tend to eat a lot more, particularly in China and Japan and somewhere they eat quite a lot of soya, only around 5 to 6% of that soya goes to human consumption. And then the remaining 4-5% goes into biofuels. So you imagine if we chopped out that 90% odd that goes to feed livestock and took that straight to human consumption, then how much land we would not need to grow soya, therefore how much of the Amazon rainforest we could maintain and not chop down. So it's this kind of conversion. It's around about 8 pounds of grain or 8 pounds of soya or whatever kind of fodder type food converts into just 1 pound of beef, which is nothing when you consider how much, if I gave you 8 pounds of soya to eat, that would last you a long time. Whereas 1 pound of beef, might last you a couple of days sort of thing. So it's quite a big difference. So there's that, there's the land use, there's the water use, there's the pollution that either both obviously the effluent produced by livestock, but also the drugs and so on that we feed them that then goes into both into our bodies, but also into the water systems and so on. So it's about land use, it's about water use, it's about food going away from humans, but going to animals instead of kind of basically going through the animal to get to the human.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the old methane argument, which everyone likes to bring up about cows farting a lot. Yeah, it has an impact. I don't think that's the biggest one to worry about. But nevertheless, it does have an impact because methane is far more damaging actually to the environment than carbon dioxide is. So that's something we really do need to think about. And also, farming in general is the single biggest carbon emitter on the planet. The production of our food is the single biggest carbon emitter on the planet. So clearly, we can't stop producing food. We all have to eat something. But if we could reduce the amount of livestock farming, which is a massive carbon emitter, then that would obviously reduce our carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere as well. Now, that obviously, clearly, I'm talking about developed countries. For developing countries, the situation is different. And I think it's something that we in developed countries should be thinking about is reducing our diet. I'm not suggesting that subsistence farmers or subsistence fishers or whatever, they should be thinking about that. I don't think that's really, that's not where the problem lies, quite frankly. Right. The problem lies in our Western diets and the way in which we farm the animals, the way in which we transport the food, and obviously the quantity of it that we eat. So if we were in the Western world to reduce our meat consumption, whether you go 100% plant-based or just kind of 80 or 90% plant-based, and say saved that really lovely, sirloin steak or whatever that you like to have, but just when it's, you have a really good one and it's a special occasion type thing, then that would make a massive, massive difference.
Well, and you're talking about, all right, I can hear myself through your computer, I think. That got louder.
Let me see if I can turn you down. Try that.
Okay. The two laws in the U.S. just came into effect in January, and it's on the land usage and the production of animals. In California, there was a big thing. Oh my God, they're banning bacon, and what they're doing is they're requiring that any bacon that's brought into the state, sold in grocery stores, restaurants, or whatever, has to meet certain animal welfare practices, that the pigs actually have to have a certain amount of space to roam and be, and which then expands our, depending on what farm it is, it's expanding that usage of land for that, right? But hopefully maybe it helps in an effort, maybe it's reducing the consumption, right?
Yeah, obviously I can't speak specifically to the Californian regulations, but say, for example, in the UK, we have RSPCA, Freedom Food, and also a Red Tractor scheme. Both of those are supposed to be schemes which indicate high levels of animal welfare. In fact, they've both been shown to do nothing of the sort. Some of them don't even meet EU regulations, which obviously up until recently we had to follow, and we didn't even manage to follow those properly. And it's still, I have pigs, right? Now, they're pet pigs. They're not pigs that I'm ever going to eat. But if I look at the amount of land that my 7 pigs need and enjoy, and they've got a kind of 4.5 acre woodland, and they're grubbing around in that all the time, and they turn it over and it gets muddy, and I have to move them around in order to give them new areas and everything. Now, okay, I'm keeping those pigs for their entire life, but they do it very quickly. It's like it doesn't take them a few years. It takes them a few months to turn it all over. So if you then think about a pig and the conditions we keep it in, I don't suppose there are any pigs, not even ones that are free range, that are kept, 7 pigs in 4.5 acres. Do not believe that for 1 second. It would not be financially sensible to do. But that's not the only issue as well. It's to do with things like how long the pig will live. So my pigs, for example, will live to something between 15 and 20 years. That's a natural lifespan of that particular breed. We kill a pig at around 6 to 9 months. Okay. That doesn't give the pig a lot of life. The same applies to a lamb. A sheep will live, 10, 12 years maybe, whereas a lamb will live 9 months, something like that. The same goes for cows and calves. It's the time at which they live. Chickens don't even get to live more than a couple of months. So it's not just about that kind of freedom to express themselves as animals, which I don't personally believe they get in any level of intensive farming. And I have not come across any kind of regulation or legislation or even advisory that actually gives animals what they need. It's also about the fact when I watch the lambs on the hillsides around my place, I look at those lambs, they think they've got their life ahead of them. They're enjoying the spring. They're dancing around with their friends, and they make friends and hang out in little groups and everything. They have no idea that 9 months' time they'll be dead. And I find that really very sad to think that, I wouldn't want to watch a child jumping around thinking I've got my life ahead of me, to know that in fact they haven't, any more than I want to watch the sheep doing much the same thing.
Right.
So yes, brilliant that they are looking to improve these things. But to be honest, I take it with a bit of a pinch of salt.
Yeah, it's gradual change that we have to look at it.
And absolutely. And you should never knock the change in the right direction. I'm all for change in the right direction, even if I feel it's not quite gone far enough, because, hey, it has to start somewhere. It has to start somewhere.
Yep, exactly. Now let's jump this to catering. And, as somebody who eats vegan, and actually this talking about you, and somebody who is going vegan for the month for Veganuary to try it, because I have to admit I eat a lot more plant-based than I do animal-based proteins, but I'm going to go completely vegan this month. What can caterers do better in meeting the needs of vegans and vegetarians?
I think one of the things that I've noticed is, there's 2 things I think that I've noticed. Number one is that there's often not a lot of choice. So as a meat eater, you might go somewhere and you'll have 3 or 4 different choices, let's just say. Whereas a vegan or a vegetarian, I'll have one choice. And one choice isn't a choice. One choice is basically being told, this is what you're eating. There's no choice. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be something to think about. If you can think of one meal, then you can probably think of 2. If you can think of one sandwich, you can think of 2. If you can think of one salad, you can probably think of 2, something like that. So I think increasing the choice so that it's not this kind of you're being told what you're eating would be good. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other thing I've noticed, and I don't know how this happens, so maybe it's just one of those weird things, but there seems to be phases. So I remember when I very first went vegetarian, everywhere you went, it was mushroom stroganoff. It was almost, I don't know why, because these people were not related to each other. I was going to different things, but it was always mushroom stroganoff. And then suddenly mushroom stroganoff disappeared and it was risotto. You couldn't go anywhere without going, it became a standing joke. It was like, oh, what's mine? That'll be risotto, because that's all you ever got. It has got better. I haven't had a mushroom stroganoff or a risotto for quite a while. Not that I mind either, but, when you kind of every time you're going, oh, right, really? So it is getting better, but I still do seem to see themes of things. So, you know, it's kind of like it's a veggie burger seems to be a theme, and everywhere you go, it's just a veggie burger. And actually, there's so much more vegetarian and vegan food. You know, if I think about what I eat in a week, and we eat loads of different things. I mean, you can have curries. You know, I had a vegetarian moussaka last night. The night before that, we had a vegetarian vegan moussaka, a vegan lasagna. I think we had vegan schnitzel. You know, at Christmas dinner, I made two things. I made a mushroom Wellington with a kind of porcini gravy and all the trimmings, and then I also did a nut roast with cranberry and port. So, you know, there's lots and lots of things that you can eat that are vegan, and yet somehow it seems to be that people often get kind of focused on this one thing, whatever this thing is. And then it feels, as I said, like everywhere you go, that's all you can get. So I think those would be the two things, really.
And quinoa, I think, was in the last couple of years was like quinoa for breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, even me the other day on January 1st, I woke up kind of like in a panic. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to eat? I'm going to be vegan for the rest of the month. I've announced it onto the world, right? And onto the world of everyone eating at a meeting, right? And that I'm going to be vegan, but I'm like, okay, well, why am I stressing out? It is actually doable. It's changing your thought process on what you're cooking and how you're cooking it. And even the other day, my mom and I live with my parents, so I became a little bit spoiled, I guess, that my mother she makes the dinners every single night. I mean, that's the thing that she loves to do. But she's like, okay, I'm making salmon and rice. What are you going to eat? And I'm like, oh, crap, I have to figure out what I'm going to eat now, you know, because I'm not forcing her and my dad to go vegan, but what am I doing? And so I took the rice and I had some leftover black beans and I mixed them together and put some sauce on it and had it with a salad. And it was a delicious dinner, very filling.
And interestingly, actually, the fact that you chose rice and beans together means you created a perfect protein. So rice and beans creates an absolute, basically pulses and grains. If you mix pulses and grains, you create the perfect protein. So if everybody's worried about, oh, where'd you get your protein from? Well, if you have rice and chickpeas or rice and lentils with something. So if we had like a chickpea curry with some rice, perfect protein. You know, if we had lentils in the moussaka or something, and then had, say, a hunk of homemade bread with it, perfect protein. Beans on toast, perfect protein.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I'm excited. Actually, it makes me want to go eat some curry tonight at the Thai restaurant downtown. So are caterers, and whether you're in a hotel, convention center, are they missing a trick by ignoring this sector or a niche? And how do we get? Yeah,
I really believe they are. And I'll give you some examples because, you know, I travel a lot. Very lucky that I get to travel a lot. But I often take my own food with me because I don't have any other choices. And I will absolutely choose the places that I eat and stay based on what food they're going to give me. Because let's face it, whether I'm traveling in the UK somewhere for work or I'm traveling because it's pleasure and I'm on holiday somewhere exotic, I want to eat, and I want to eat nice food. Now, and that's not necessarily because I'm a real kind of gastro foodie person. It's just because nice food is nice at the end of the day. Let's face it.
Real food.
So I will, I will absolutely choose where I go and where I stay and which restaurants I eat in, based on whether they will cater for me. Because I don't want to eat somewhere where I've got to eat something where I go, right, I'm paying for this, but I don't really want it. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody, whether you're vegan or anything else, you don't want to be doing that. And I know I've gone to places. I can think, for example, not that long ago, I was in Maine and I was there just for a couple of nights, or sort of 2 full days, really, before I boarded a boat. And I found a restaurant that had lots of vegan and vegetarian options. So having found them, yes, it would have been lovely to have tried some different places for the 4 meals I was going to eat while I was there, you know, my lunch and my dinner. But actually, I went back and I had all 4 meals at that same restaurant, because the aggravation of schlepping around town, trying to look at the menu, look at would it actually, is it really vegan? Then having to go in and ask, have they got anything else? You know, it was just easy. This place did it for me. I spent all my food dollars in that one restaurant purely because they catered for me properly. And if I travel with friends or family, whether they're vegan or not, they are not going to go into a restaurant where I can't eat. Right. So that means, let's just say I've got 3 friends with me, for argument's sake. We would have gone into restaurants that catered for me, as long as they didn't have horrible looking other food, which is unlikely, let's face it. Then my friends are going to go, yeah, we'll go there, Chantal. There's lots of things I can eat there. You can eat. Fantastic. Right. Because they're not going to say to me, oh, we'll go into this restaurant while you sit out on the pavement. You know, that's not going to happen. Right. So it's not just my money as an individual that you're losing. It's the people that I travel with that you're losing as well. And because vegan or plant-based food often, not always, but often caters for other dietary requirements. So, for example, people are wanting to eat more healthily, or people who are gluten-free. Not all vegan food is obviously gluten-free, but often it can be. Or people who want to, say, cut down on salt or sugar or whatever it happens to be, then often vegan food can fulfill that as well. So if you can kind of have, say, 3 or 4 vegan options on your menu or plant-based options on your menu, some of which also do these other things, then it's like you're hitting all the boxes. Everybody, I can have a group of 10 friends with me and we can all eat in your place. We can all stay in your hotel. We can all enjoy the conference at your conference center. So, yeah, I absolutely think it's not just about kind of you're not being very imaginative, which, let's face it, you're not if you're not catering for that for other people. It's actually you are missing out on money. There is actual money that you are leaving on the table, to use that phrase.
All right. It reminds me of a story of a hotel chef that I chatted with in Florida. And he was actually the pastry chef. But these 3 women came in for, or 2 women came in for a 3-day conference or whatever they were going to be there. And they're vegan. And they looked at the restaurant menus and they couldn't eat. And it was like iceberg lettuce, tomatoes, and shredded lettuce or shredded carrots, right? So they left. So that was 3 meals, 3 days. So that's 9 meals per person, 18 meals times 36 meals that hotel lost the money for because those women ate off property. Well, I was talking to him and they were like, holy crap, whatever. And so he was having a ball figuring out how to do pastries that are gluten-free and vegan and vegetarian so that they could actually keep those 2 women in the restaurants and in the event space, instead of sending them off property. Yeah. I mean, they realize that I need to get back in touch with him and just see how that whole process is going as well, because he was excited and he was getting his sous chefs excited about learning, how to use aquafaba and how to use almond flour and a variety of things. So that's just one real life case example that hotel was like, yeah, we got to do this.
Yeah. And I think also if you've got a good chef, which hopefully you have in your establishment, then they should actually, I think, find it relatively easy, because at the end of the day, it's all just food. Right. Somehow we sort of seem to divide it up into somehow this is something different than food. No, it's all just food. It's made from the same stuff that everything else is made from. And actually there are a lot more choices. If you think about how many meat choices there are versus how many vegetable and non-meat choices there are, it's phenomenal. It would almost be more restrictive to turn around and say it's got to have meat in it than it is to say it's got to have vegetables in it and not the meat. So I think, any good chef shouldn't have a problem with it. And actually, again, anybody who enjoys cooking in that whole process, and, my partner is a good example. He's not a chef, but he does love cooking. He actually really enjoys, watching those YouTube videos, looking through the cookery books, thinking about how he can adapt something. If he did this and put this with it instead, and how would I do that and so on, and I'm nowhere near as good as cooking as he is, but I enjoy that process when I went from vegetarian to vegan, kind of looking at, well, how could I do that? Because I still want to eat that, but how could I do it? And, I've found it's taken a bit of time. I'm not suggesting it's an overnight, instant thing. There is now nothing really that I used to eat that I don't still eat now as a vegan. It's taken a bit of time to work it out, but it's absolutely doable.
Well, and something you said right at the beginning is like the steak thing is like, think of filet mignon. When you go to a restaurant, you get filet mignon and you get it with Oscar crab meat on it, but that's not the only thing on your plate. Everything else is there. So let's think about, really, it's just that little piece of steak with nothing on it. You just cooked it to the right temperature to everybody's liking. But it's really, the focus should be on the sides there instead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you don't want overcooked green beans or asparagus, and you're going to complain about the overcooked green beans and asparagus as well, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so all right. So you talked about traveling. So as for me, traveling, besides packing my own food, because I am used to packing my own food, so it's actually going to be a little bit challenging for me because I am gluten-free first, and then vegan, and then my my allergy is actually yeast. So the nutritional yeast is is going to be a challenge for me in being vegan, because a lot of people add it to make it taste cheesier or whatever. But what tips do you have for me traveling as a vegan?
I think
besides bringing my own food,
I have to say, bring some of your own food, because to be perfectly honest, you're kind of going to need it. Now, I don't mean, pack your whole suitcase full with your entire 2 weeks worth of meals, but I kind of bring things like, I bring some of the stuff that I really like, or some of the stuff that I know I can add to something that will just give it a little bit of a sort of perk it up and so on. We generally, when we travel, go self-catering, because it does make life a lot easier. But obviously, if you don't want to self-cater, and I can understand that completely, then that does make it a little bit more challenging. In which case, there are some apps that you can use. Things like Happy Cow is a good one that I've used quite a bit to find vegetarian and vegan restaurants locally. Or if you're staying in a hotel and planning to eat there, then I always tell them in advance that I'm vegan, and, sort of say, happy to answer any questions, or we do eat this, but, we wouldn't eat that or whatever, to try and make it as easy as possible for them. That doesn't always work. And of course, clearly, if you're staying at cheaper places, that tends to be harder for them to deal with because of the, the setup that they have and so on.
Right.
As if you're staying at very high end places, then it's clearly a lot easier for them to deal with. So I think it's about find a few things that you can take with you that will just kind of help you along, so to speak. Do some research. Either, I have to say, I don't generally tend to do a lot of research before I go. Once I've decided on where I'm going and the place that I'm staying and so on, then I'll generally kind of play it by ear when I get there and just live with whatever I have to live with, even if it means going to the same restaurant 4 times, And then I think it's also about communication, because best will in the world, if the place that you're going to, whether it's a conference or a restaurant or a hotel or whatever, hasn't got any advance notice and doesn't know, then it is going to make it harder for them. So I always try to kind of give advance notice. And I did that recently at a place we went to locally. And they didn't have anything particularly vegetarian or vegan on the menu that I could see on the website. So when I called up, I asked and said, can you cater for, because there's a vegan in the party. And they were like, yeah, that's no problem. You've given us plenty of notice. I think it was about 3 or 4 days notice we'd given them when we booked. And I had the most amazing meal. I mean, a really incredible meal. It just kind of blew me away, So I think that, again, was an indication of just by giving them a little bit of a heads up. And I know it's not always possible. You can't always give 4 days notice, but you probably could give a few hours, or something like that even. Or even when you go in, say, actually, this is one that slightly annoys me, but it's worth remembering, is ask them if they've got a separate vegan menu or a separate gluten-free menu. I personally don't think that's a good way of doing it. I think it should all be on the same menu, and I shouldn't have to ask for it, because how do I know whether to ask for it or not? But nevertheless, it is worth asking, because some places do still, for some reason, put their gluten-free or their vegan on a completely separate menu that you have to ask for. So that would be another thing to do, would be to ask. But I think it's, take some snacks and try and give them a little bit of notice if you can.
Well, and that reminds me of a dinner that I went with my friend Barbara years ago, and she's Jewish, and we were sitting down at a dinner restaurant, and her questions about the menu were the same as mine. With that steak, is there butter on it? Or, so understanding those different needs for different preferences or the needs for different diets, whether it's religious based or it's gluten-free or whatever. I mean, I went to a restaurant yesterday, probably the only place I can get a decent vegan meal in my town. And I'm like, okay, well, does the cheese have yeast in it? And she's like, I don't think so. And I'm like, so it's understanding those questions and being able to ask. And so to me, giving advance notice is really, really important and helpful because you don't think about it.
No, you don't have to then too much. But also from the point of view of the restaurant or whatever, labeling is really, really important. So if, for example, there's a big buffet, then having it really clearly labeled as vegan or as gluten-free or whatever it is. Now, I know you can't go through every single potential ingredient that's on there. That may be a little bit excessive and difficult to do. But I think if you've got good labeling to start off with, you'll help most people, which means you'll save your staff a lot of time as well, because they won't constantly be being hassled by somebody going, has it got this in it? Has it got that in it? And the person's got to go back to the kitchen and find out whether it's got this. And they come back and they go, oh, and by the way, has it got that? That just takes up staff time, which is precious. So I think by getting some really good, clear labeling, that will help reduce the amount of time and effort you have to put into it yourself, as a business. Also, I think shows a level of respect to the people coming to the buffet or whatever it is, that you actually understand that people have different needs. You've tried your very best to cater for that. While you're doing the labelling, and I worked with a hotel in Greece on this, and it was really interesting. When we went through the labelling and said, okay, let's just label what you've got. Let's not change your buffet. Let's just label it. Let's start there. What that immediately showed was where the gaps were. That showed that on some tables of the buffet, there was lots of vegan choices, and on other tables, there were none. And therefore, just by labeling it kind of highlighted that and meant that then it was much easier for the restaurant manager and the chef to work together to go, okay, we're kind of okay in this area, but we're not very good over here. Let's see what we could do. So I'd say labeling is useful on lots of levels, but do make it really clear and, maybe bright colours to show that it's vegan or it's gluten-free or whatever. So I haven't got to go the kind of, because, I'm getting old now. I can't always see that clearly. So having nice, bright symbols is a good way of doing it. So I think the labelling's important. And then obviously it makes my life as a consumer coming in much, much easier as well, because I can see what it is I can and can't eat. And then I know immediately whether there's something missing that I need. Or actually quite often I can get quite inventive. I have had some peculiar meals, but they've been quite nice, where you kind of mix a whole load of things that you wouldn't normally put together, but actually they're all quite nice. So it's almost like you make yourself a mini tapas on the plate. But again, with good labeling, I can do that much easier than if I'm looking at everything and going, I don't know, was it cooked in butter? I don't know. Has it got bacon bits hidden in it somewhere? I don't know. So I think that's a good thing for, I think the labeling, which equals communication, if you want to call it that, is a very useful way of moving forward.
All right. So one of the things that I don't have the box up here anymore, but so the other day I went and bought myself some crackers, and I talked about it on this video in the Eating at a Meeting group. And I bought these crackers because they're gluten-free and I love them and they're delicious. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I was about to eat them. And on the front of it, it says dairy-free, but on the side, it says contains eggs. And I completely forgot to look at the label. And I'm like, okay, for this month, I'm like, here, Mom, you get to eat these all month long instead of me. But what about the vegan certifications? Do you rely on that? And that goes just for prepackaged foods. Do you rely on buying the products that have that certification, or are you really still looking at the label?
I look at the label because lots of, and I fell foul similar to you recently. I found it said it was a dairy-free mayonnaise. And I was like, oh, fantastic. Because there's a vegan mayonnaise, and Hellmann's do a really nice vegan mayonnaise. And this one was a garlic version, but by a different company. I thought, oh, great. My partner will love that. So I bought him a jar. And then, of course, exactly like you went, oh, it's got eggs in it. It was the dairy-free that kind of attracted me. And I was like, oh, perfect. And then, so I should have looked closer is really what I'm saying there. But even as someone who does it all the time, you fall foul sometimes. That's just life. Well, but yeah, I do tend to, when I'm not being suckered in by the mayonnaise, I do tend to look at the label. So obviously if it's got vegan certified on it, then I will trust that. I'm sure, but you know what, there's a limit to what you can do in life, kind of thing. So I take that if it's vegan certified, fine. And if it's not, then I will look at the ingredients and often make my own decision as to whether or not I find it acceptable. Because I think lots of companies still have a little bit of a reticence about labeling things as vegan, in that somehow that sort of means that they're only suitable for vegans, which of course is not what it means at all. And I know I still get abuse on social media and so on from people about being vegan. You know, you'd think, wouldn't you, 21st century, we'd be past that, but you know, no. And, you know, I've heard people say stupid things like, I wouldn't eat anything that was vegan ever, sort of thing. And you feel like saying, what, you mean you've never eaten a carrot? You know, it's just ridiculous. But, you know, there are still some people like that. And therefore, I think there is this slight reticence about labeling things quite overtly as being vegan. So for me, I think it's a shame. I think it will change. But right now, no, I'm there, you know, with my mobile phone light and my glasses and all the rest of it, peering at that tiny, weeny writing, just trying to make sure whether it's vegan or not.
Just a quick story on the vegan mayonnaise. My friend Corey works for Whole Foods, and he says 5 times a day he gets the question, can I have dairy? Where's the dairy-free mayonnaise? And he's like, mayonnaise is dairy-free because mayonnaise is made from eggs. And so that signage that they put on there was a trick to get you to buy it, right? Because it should automatically be dairy-free. It's made from eggs. And my mom and I had this conversation the other day. She's like, well, I consider eggs dairy. I'm like, nope. Eggs come from chickens. Dairy comes from cows. And we get lost in that because it's the eggs are in the dairy section of the grocery store, which makes sense.
And I know growing up, like your mum, I kind of, you know, I was always told that eggs, and although I knew that eggs weren't dairy, as in they weren't milk, as you say, they were always in the same section. They always came in the same way. You got them from the milkman who came round and delivered the milk, kind of thing. Right. So yeah, absolutely. I looked at that and went dairy free. My head was still in the, you know, way back in the last century. And I just, because you are absolutely right. You're absolutely right in what you say.
Okay.
But yeah, we're still fooled.
We are still fooled. I have one quick question before I do want to ask this question. So all the terminology on some of the labeling, you know, there's the words that we can't read, right? You know, of terminology that people are putting into some of these prepackaged foods that we're choosing to eat. And even in the vegan ones, when you go to some conventions and you look at them, hey, here's the vegan section. And I'm like, I can't read those words. I mean, as a vegan, a full practicing vegan, are you buying those products or are you sticking with all like plant-based whole food vegan items?
So I would say 90% of the time I'm kind of whole food, plant-based, vegan kind of, and it's not so much of an issue. That said, there are always times when you're going to buy something that's prepackaged, whether you're out and about, whether, you know, you just, let's face it, some of the really naughty foods, you know, like the cakes and the sweets and so on, they have a lot of those strange words in them. And I like those as well. You know, I don't want to spend my whole life never eating, you know, another slice of cake again, heaven forbid. So, you know, I try not to beat myself up about it, right? So the vegan mayonnaise actually is an example of my partner and I talked about it and went, well, what do? We've bought it now. So to be honest, chucking it in the bin isn't going to help anybody. And it's not that I don't eat eggs because I have an allergy to eggs. It's just I don't approve of it. So there was kind of 2 choices. Do we have a friend that we give it to? Well, that doesn't stop the chickens. That doesn't solve the problem, if you see what I mean, giving it away. Right. Or do we just eat it because we've now got it and it would be stupid to waste the food? And I have to be honest, in the end, we just went, we'll just eat it. It's 1 jar of mayonnaise, you know, it's right. Not the end of the world kind of thing. So I think there's an element of try to be realistic and don't beat yourself up too much about it. That doesn't mean that so that's just to make sure, if you were making a vegan sandwich, let's say as a caterer or a hotel, and you were making a vegan sandwich and you decide, it's only a tiny bit of non-vegan mayonnaise, doesn't matter. No, that's absolutely not acceptable. If you're going to call it vegan, it has to be vegan. And just saying, as I have had said to me, oh, there's only a tiny little bit of pork in it. Yes, but it's got pork in it. You know, the quantity is not the issue here. So I think it's, you know, yes, you have to be careful, but as an individual, I think occasionally whenever you have to make those choices, like it was a case of chuck the mayonnaise away or eat it. Well, I'd eat it. You know, if I'm at a friend's birthday party and they've made a lovely fruit cake for their birthday or something, but it's not vegan, you know, I don't want to turn around and go, I'm not going to have your birthday cake. You know, it's like, no, I'll have a slice of birthday cake because we're all celebrating together and so on. The same with the champagne, even if it wasn't a vegan champagne, you know, I would still drink it because I think there are occasions when you have to make those decisions because you live in a real world. But that doesn't mean that I can't say 99% of my time be vegan and stick with those things. So that kind of is the same answer I would give for your question about, weird sounding ingredients is, right. Yeah, I try and educate myself as to what they really are. So there are some actually which sound awful, which really are just, are nothing to worry about. So I kind of have my head around what those are. Right. And then the other ones, you know what, if I really want it, and it is vegan for the rest of it or whatever, or something, then generally speaking, it's like, you know what, let yourself have it sometimes. It's not that big a deal, really. In the same way as if you said, I love, a Chateaubriand, for example, mm-hmm. And that's my favorite way of eating beef or something. And you decided to have that, once every 2 or 3 months, but the rest of the time you were plant-based. What's the problem?
Right. And that's in your house. It's not selling something. Like you said, that's the choice that you're making in your house or when you go out. But although a planner just said, hey, she sent me an email the other day. She's like, yeah, we made all these accommodations for these people and they did it. And then all of a sudden they sit down and they're like, oh no, we're going to have the steak. They told in advance that that they are vegan. And then they chose not to be vegan when they got on, and that effort.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah. So that I have to say I don't agree with, because if you've gone ahead and said that you're vegan, then I think, and you say, and the venue has made that effort, then I think you kind of are obligated really to go that way. So when I say about letting yourself off a little bit, for me, it's only when I have to, if that makes sense, rather than, so I don't consider myself a flexitarian. I consider myself a vegan, but I know that there are times when that doesn't always work out the way that I want it to work. Now, the mayonnaise is a very unusual thing. That was like a one-off, Right, yeah. But in our house, we'll be vegan. But when I'm out, sometimes, as I said, it's just not possible. So I think talking as an individual, say talking to you as an individual person, I would say do your utmost best to be vegan during January, longer if you can, but don't beat yourself up if you make that mistake and you suddenly find that you bought this thing and you go, it's got something in it. Well, you know what, it's got something in it. But as a caterer, I think it's very different. As a caterer, you have an obligation to, not only an obligation, but actually it makes good business sense to cater for people and to be honest and open about the ingredients that are in them. So don't try and fob off something as vegan if it's not vegan. And if it's just vegetarian and not vegan, then label it and claim, say that it's vegetarian. And don't assume that every vegan is willing to not be vegan just because you couldn't be bothered to cater for them properly, because that's not the case. I know plenty of vegans who would not behave the way that I do, in that kind of let myself off the hook occasionally. And I think and to be honest, I admire them for it, brilliant. But we all have to do it in our own way. And no, for me, it's not something I do a lot. It's something I do very occasionally, but it's also not something I want to do on a regular basis. So I went to a restaurant recently. They had one vegan, in fact, they had one vegetarian option for starter, and I think they had a vegan option for main course and nothing for dessert. And I sort of spoke to them and said, the truth is I will not be coming back. I said, there's no question your chef can cook beautiful food. What I had was lovely. I said, but I live locally. I want to bring friends here when they come to visit, but I won't be coming again because I have to compromise my ethics in order to eat here. So not knowing when I first turned up is one thing. I had actually written on there that I was vegan, didn't make any difference at all to them. And in advance, at least for 3 or 4 days in advance, that had made no difference to them. So I don't want to knowingly go somewhere where I know I'm going to have to compromise my ethics in order to eat that food. It's only when I have no choice.
Yeah. Okay. That makes complete sense. One of the things that I want to do for 2022 is talk about how each of my speakers, the topics and what we're talking about relates to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And everyone, I will put a link in the chat about where the Sustainable Development Goals are. And when I ask you in advance, there's 17 of them for everybody to know. But I mean, veganism touches on 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 of them at least. Poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, clean water and sanitation, clean energy, sustainable cities, responsible consumption, life on land and below water. I mean, it impacts each one of those.
It really does. And I think it's interesting. Again, we have to go back to thinking about what we eat in the sort of Western developed world here. But if we, as in the developed world, were to eat less meat, that would have, as I said, a massive land impact. It would have food inequality, as in there would be more food available because in developing world countries where a lot of that food is grown, that's then fed to cattle, which is then obviously the cattle are then fed to us in the Western world. So you're right, actually, by reducing your meat consumption, we can help to reduce poverty. We can help to reach that goal of zero hunger. It will help both with our own and other people's health and well-being. It will help with clean water because we know that livestock farming does have an impact on watercourses. It can have an impact on economic growth and so on as well for these countries where they can actually produce their own food rather than having to import food and things as well. So that helps. So you're right, it does actually fit an awful lot of them. And clearly things like climate action has a massive impact on that because, as we said right at the beginning, our farming and our food production has such a huge impact on our climate, not just on terms of carbon emissions, but in terms of land use and pollution and transport and all those kind of things. So, yeah, it is sort of interesting that just by cutting back the amount of meat that we eat, how many of those goals we can help. Doesn't somehow magically mean, go plant-based, everything's sorted. But it does definitely help.
Yeah. Okay. That's really amazing. And I really like that. So hopefully people will look at it differently in that respect. So thank you so much for being with us. And just one final question. If you could have dinner with anyone, alive or dead, who would it be?
Oh, good grief. Now that is a question to ask. I really don't know, actually. Whoever it would be. I like to have dinner with people who know about things that I don't know about. I like to have people who challenge me on my ideas. So I kind of have to really fight for them a little bit. It doesn't mean I want an argument, but it means I like having to justify my ideas because it makes me think about them. And I like people who can then challenge it and kind of go, but you thought about this? And you have to go, oh, that's a good point. Right, got to find a reason why that's, So I think it would be someone like that, super intelligent, challenging, but also willing to listen.
I love that answer. And we need more of those conversations in general. Yeah. So again, thank you so much, Chantal, for being here and talking with me and the Eating at a Meeting listeners. Everybody, you've been listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. We are live every Wednesday on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And this audio conversation will actually turn into a podcast episode in the next couple of weeks. So make sure that you download the Eating at a Meeting podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. And if you want, you can join the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group and just look for Eating at a Meeting on Facebook and you'll find it. So thank you for listening. Until next time, Happy New Year and stay safe and eat well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.